The glow of molten metal, the rhythmic pounding of a hammer, these were the sounds that echoed through medieval villages, carrying the weight of entire kingdoms on their shoulders. In an era where the right blade could turn the tide of battle, blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen, they were the unsung heroes of their time. Picture this, a lone figure bent over a forge, transforming raw iron into a weapon so finely honed it could slice through armor with ease. This wasn't just manual labor, it was an art form, a dance of fire and steel that demanded precision, patience, and an almost mystical understanding of materials. These artisans worked with tools that seem shockingly simple by today's standards, yet they produced weapons that have become the stuff of legend. How did they do it? What secrets lay hidden in their techniques? That's the story we're about to unravel. Think about the swords that have passed into myth: Excalibur, Durandal, the weapons of kings and warriors whose names still send shivers down our spines. Behind every one of these legendary blades stood a blacksmith, their hands calloused from years of labor, their eyes sharp enough to spot the slightest flaw in the metal. These weren't just tools, they were extensions of the warriors who wielded them, forged with care and imbued with the spirit of their makers. The medieval blacksmith didn't have modern machinery or temperature gauges. Instead, they relied on intuition, passed down knowledge, and an intimate bond with their craft. They could read the color of heated steel like a language, knowing exactly when to strike, when to cool, and when to fold the metal to create something extraordinary. What's even more remarkable is that these weapons weren't just functional, they were masterpieces. A well-crafted sword wasn't just a means to an end, it was a symbol of status, a work of art adorned with intricate patterns and inscriptions. The blacksmith's forge was a place of alchemy, where raw ore was transformed into something greater than the sum of its parts. And while we might marvel at their achievements today, the truth is that these artisans faced immense challenges. Every piece of metal was precious, every mistake costly. They worked in dim, smoky workshops, battling the elements and the limitations of their tools to create weapons that would stand the test of time. So how did they overcome these obstacles? What techniques did they use to turn rough iron into weapons of war and beauty? That's the journey we're about to take step by step, flame by flame, into the heart of the medieval forge. In medieval villages, the blacksmith's workshop was more than just a workplace, it was a place of wonder. These craftsmen weren't merely shaping metal, they were shaping history. With every strike of the hammer, they wove together practicality and artistry, turning lumps of iron into objects that could defend kingdoms or plow fields. But their role went far beyond the forge. Blacksmiths were the engineers of their time, solving problems that no one else could. Need a hinge for a castle gate, a plow strong enough to break tough soil, a sword fit for a knight. The blacksmith was the answer. Their workshops buzzed with activity, drawing everyone from farmers to nobles, all relying on their skill to keep daily life and warfare moving smoothly. What set these artisans apart was their deep, almost sacred knowledge. Unlike today, where technical skills can be learned from books or videos, medieval blacksmiths absorbed their craft through years of apprenticeship, watching, failing, and refining under the watchful eye of a master. This wasn't just a trade, it was a tradition guarded as closely as a knight's sword. Secrets of tempering steel, the perfect balance of a blade, even the mystical symbols sometimes etched into weapons, all were passed down like precious heirlooms. Some smiths were even believed to have supernatural insight, their ability to tame fire and metal seeming almost magical to the common folk. It's no wonder they occupied a unique space in society, respected as much as healers or scholars. Yet their true genius lay in their resourcefulness. Without modern tools or precise measurements, they relied on instinct honed by experience. A master smith could judge the temperature of molten metal just by its color. A deep cherry red meant one thing, a bright yellow another. They knew how to layer and fold steel to create blades that were both flexible and deadly, a technique that modern metallurgists still admire. And when materials were scarce, they improvised, reforging broken weapons or even recycling nails into something new. Every scrap of metal had value, and waste was unthinkable. This relentless ingenuity turned their workshops into cradles of innovation, where necessity truly was the mother of invention. Perhaps most fascinating is how their work bridged the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary. A blacksmith might spend his morning shoeing horses, a humble but vital task, and his afternoon crafting a sword destined for battle. In their hands, the same fire that shaped a humble cooking pot could also bring a knight's armor to life. This duality made them indispensable, their craft woven into every layer of medieval life. From the peasant's plow to the king's crown, the blacksmith's touch was everywhere, a quiet testament to the power of skill over brute force. Their legacy isn't just in the weapons they forged, but in the very world they helped build, one piece of iron at a time. At the center of every blacksmith's workshop stood the forge, a pulsing, fiery heart that breathed life into cold metal. This wasn't just a fire pit, it was a carefully controlled inferno, where the difference between success and failure came down to the skill of managing flames. Charcoal, the lifeblood of the forge, burned with an intense heat, but it was the blacksmith's understanding of air and fire that turned it into a tool of transformation. Apprentices would tirelessly work the bellows, their arms aching as they pumped air into the flames, pushing temperatures high enough to make iron pliable. Too little air and the metal would remain stubbornly hard. Too much and it might overheat, becoming brittle and useless. The forge demanded respect. A single misstep could ruin hours of labor or even endanger the smith and his workshop. Mastering the forge was like learning to speak the language of fire. Experienced blacksmiths didn't need modern thermometers. They read the glow of the metal like a seasoned chef watches a simmering pot. A deep red meant the iron was ready for bending, while a bright yellow signaled it was near molten, perfect for welding. The color told them everything: when to strike, when to wait, when to pull the metal from the flames. This intimate knowledge wasn't written in books. It was earned through years of trial and error, passed from mentor to apprentice in a chain of trust that stretched back generations. The forge was also a place of transformation, where raw materials shed their rough beginnings. A lump of iron ore, dull and unremarkable, would enter the fire and emerge as something entirely new, ready to be shaped into a sword, a plowshare, or a nail. This alchemy wasn't just physical, it was almost spiritual. In many cultures, the forge was seen as a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a place where ordinary men worked with elemental forces. Some legends even spoke of blacksmiths receiving visions in the flickering flames, their creations guided by unseen hands. Yet for all its mystery, the forge was a brutally practical space. Every piece of charcoal was precious, every breath of air carefully measured. Waste was not an option. Smiths would often reuse heat, timing their work so that one task flowed into the next without letting the fire die down. A skilled blacksmith could judge not just the metal's readiness, but also the efficiency of his flame, stretching resources further than an untrained eye could imagine. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about survival in a world where every scrap of fuel and metal had to be earned through back-breaking labor. What's truly remarkable is how these craftsmen achieved such precision with what we'd consider primitive tools. Without digital readouts or temperature controls, they relied on senses honed by decades of practice. The hiss of metal cooling in water, the way a hammer's ring changed as the steel hardened, these were the cues that guided their hands. The forge was their partner in creation, a living thing that demanded attention, patience, and an unshakable understanding of its rhythms. To stand before one was to witness the meeting of human ingenuity and raw elemental power, a dance that shaped the medieval world in ways we're still uncovering today. The hammer was more than just a tool, it was an extension of the blacksmith's will. Each swing carried generations of knowledge, the weight of the head calibrated to transform glowing metal with surgical precision. Lighter hammers danced across the surface, refining edges with delicate taps, while heavier ones reshaped the very soul of the iron with thunderous blows. But raw strength alone meant nothing without control. A master smith's rhythm was like a heartbeat, steady and purposeful, every strike landing exactly where intended. They didn't just hit the metal, they conversed with it, listening to the way it rang under the hammer, adjusting their technique to the material's subtle whispers. Tongs were the unsung heroes of the forge, their rough grips the only barrier between flesh and searing heat. Crafted from the same iron they manipulated, these tools had to withstand temperatures that would melt lesser metals. The blacksmith's hands might blister from the forge's radiant glow, but the tongs never faltered, their jaws clamping onto red-hot steel with unshakable loyalty. What's remarkable is how these simple instruments came in countless shapes, some with curved tips for holding blades, others with flat ends for gripping sheets of metal. A well-worn pair of tongs was a testament to years of labor, their surfaces polished smooth by countless hours of use. Then there was the anvil, the silent partner in every creation. More than just a work surface, it was the stage where metal met destiny. Its flat face absorbed blows with unyielding resistance, while the horn, a tapered extension, allowed for bending and curving. The hardy hole and pritchel hole, small depressions in the anvil's surface, became secret weapons for punching through metal or bending it into perfect angles. A blacksmith's anvil wasn't just a tool, it was a library of techniques, its scars and dents telling stories of every sword, hinge, and horseshoe borne upon it. Chisels and punches may seem humble, but in skilled hands they became instruments of artistry. A well-placed chisel could carve intricate patterns into a blade's surface or cleanly sever a piece of hot metal with a single strike. Punches driven by the hammer's force created holes for rivets or decorative accents, their tips hardened to resist the punishing heat. These tools required a delicate balance, too much force and the metal would warp, too little and the mark wouldn't take. The blacksmith's control here bordered on the miraculous, turning brute force into something resembling calligraphy in steel. What's truly astonishing is how these tools, so basic in form, could produce such staggering complexity. A medieval blacksmith didn't need power tools or laser guides. With nothing but a hammer's weight, the anvil's resonance, and the tong's steadfast grip, they could layer steel into Damascus patterns, fold iron into springy resilience, or taper a blade to lethal sharpness. Their mastery wasn't in the tools themselves, but in the centuries of wisdom behind each movement, the way a hammer's angle could compress metal grains for strength, or how a chisel's edge could reveal hidden beauty in what began as a shapeless lump. This was craftsmanship distilled to its purest form, where simplicity and skill collided to create the extraordinary. In the medieval blacksmith's world, not all metal was created equal. Wrought iron, soft and forgiving, bent easily under the hammer, perfect for everyday tools like hinges or plows, but when it came to weapons, this same malleability became a weakness. A blade made purely of wrought iron might survive a peasant's workload, but in battle, it would dull too quickly or even snap under stress. On the other end of the spectrum stood steel, a material so hard it could hold an edge capable of cleaving through armor. Yet steel was temperamental, resisting the smith's hammer with a stubbornness that demanded both skill and patience. The true genius of medieval blacksmiths lay in their ability to marry these opposites, blending the flexibility of iron with the unyielding strength of steel to create something greater than either could achieve alone. The secret to this alchemy was carbon. Pure iron, though workable, lacked the hardness needed for weapons, but introduced just the right amount of carbon, often through a process called carburization, and the metal transformed. Smiths would pack iron bars in charcoal and heat them for hours, sometimes days, allowing carbon atoms to seep into the metal structure. Too little carbon, and the blade would remain soft. Too much, and it became brittle, shattering like glass under impact. The perfect balance was a closely guarded secret, passed down through generations of smiths like a sacred recipe. Some masters even added organic materials like bone or leather to the forge, believing these elements imparted unique qualities to the steel. What's fascinating is how these craftsmen could judge carbon content without modern tools. They relied on subtle cues, the way the metal sparkled when struck, the sound it made when cooled, even the color of the flames during forging. A master might snap a test piece, examining the grain of the fracture like a fortune teller reading tea leaves. The finest blades often bore a distinctive pattern, visible in the rippling lines etched into their surface, a fingerprint of the folding and welding process that distributed carbon unevenly, creating layers of hard and soft steel within a single blade. This knowledge didn't come cheap. Countless weapons likely shattered in testing, their failures teaching harsh lessons about temperature control and material purity. But when everything aligned, the right ore, the perfect heat, the smith's unwavering focus, the result was a weapon that defied expectations. Swords like the famed Ulfbert blades of the Vikings, with their near-mythical resilience, were testament to this mastery. These weren't just chunks of sharpened metal, they were carefully engineered creations, their very composition a triumph of medieval science disguised as craft. Perhaps most remarkable was how blacksmiths adapted to their limitations. Without consistent access to high-quality ore, many learned to recycle, reforging old nails or broken tools into serviceable steel. Others developed techniques like pattern welding, where rods of iron and steel were twisted together like strands of a rope, then hammered flat to create a blade with alternating bands of hard and soft metal. This not only conserved precious materials but also produced weapons with a flexibility that monolithic steel couldn't match. Every smith's workshop became a laboratory of sorts, where centuries of accumulated wisdom met the relentless innovation born of necessity. The legacy of these experiments lives on today. Modern metallurgists still study medieval blades, marveling at how artisans without microscopes or chemistry textbooks achieved results that sometimes rival modern alloys. In an age where we take uniform materials for granted, there's something deeply human about the medieval blacksmith's approach, their willingness to wrestle with imperfections, to find brilliance not in purity but in balance. Their greatest weapon wasn't just the steel they forged, but the wisdom to know that true strength lies in harmony, not brute force. Watching a master blacksmith at work was like witnessing a symphony of fire and force. As the metal glowed from deep cherry to vibrant orange, every shade told a story, a language only the trained eye could decipher. That first critical strike came not when the metal was merely hot, but when it reached the exact moment of plasticity, where hammer meets iron like a sculptor's chisel meeting marble. Too early, and the metal would resist, cracking under pressure. Too late, and it would lose its malleability, becoming as unyielding as stone. The blacksmith's timing wasn't just skill, it was intuition forged through countless hours of listening to the metal's subtle cues. The hammer's rhythm was anything but random. Each blow had purpose, some heavy and deliberate to move mass, others light and rapid to refine an edge. A skilled smith could alternate between these techniques seamlessly, their arms moving with the precision of a loom weaving thread. What looked like brute strength was actually careful calculation, distributing force to compress the metal's internal grain structure without creating weak points. They might start with broad, sweeping strikes to rough out a blade's shape, then shift to precise taps along the edge, folding the steel over itself like a baker laminating dough. This wasn't just hitting metal, it was coaxing it into alignment, persuading atoms to rearrange themselves into something stronger than their original form. Color was the blacksmith's most trusted guide. A dull red glow meant the metal could be bent for scrollwork or rivets. Bright orange signaled ideal conditions for drawing out length, perhaps stretching a sword's tip to a lethal point. But that fleeting moment of yellow-white was reserved for welding, when two pieces of iron could be fused together under a hail of hammer blows. The smith had to work fast then, before the heat faded and the window of opportunity closed. Some masters could judge temperature within mere degrees, their eyes calibrated like living pyrometers. They knew that steel cooled differently in humid air versus dry, that winter forging required adjustments summer smiths might never consider. What's often overlooked is how these artisans managed heat beyond the forge. They didn't just heat metal, they choreographed its cooling. Quenching a blade in water or oil too rapidly could lock in stresses, dooming it to shatter in battle. Instead, they might bury a nearly finished sword in warm ashes, allowing it to relax over hours like a muscle after exertion. Some traditions called for quenching in unusual liquids, brine for extra hardness, or even urine, whose chemical properties could alter the steel's crystalline structure. These weren't superstitions, they were the precursors to modern heat treatment, developed through generations of observation and refinement. The true marvel was how blacksmiths achieved such consistency with such variable materials. Unlike modern factories working with standardized alloys, medieval smiths faced ore of wildly differing quality. One shipment might be rich in carbon, perfect for sword cores, while another was better suited for agricultural tools. They adapted on the fly, adjusting their hammer techniques to suit the metal's personality. Some iron responded well to aggressive forging, while other batches required gentler persuasion. This intimate dance between craftsman and material elevated their work from mere production to true artistry, where every finished piece bore the marks of its unique journey from raw earth to refined instrument. The transformation from raw iron to a lethal blade began with a process known as drawing out a test of both strength and subtlety. The blacksmith would heat the metal until it glowed a deep orange, then place it on the anvil, hammering with controlled force to stretch and elongate the material. This wasn't mindless pounding. Each strike had to follow a precise rhythm, gradually thinning the metal while maintaining its structural integrity. Too much force in one spot could create weak points, so the smith's hammer moved like a painter's brush, distributing pressure evenly across the surface. The goal was to create a rough silhouette, a blank canvas that would eventually become a sword, dagger, or axe. As the basic shape emerged, attention turned to the edges where the blade's lethality would be born. Tapering required a different touch, lighter, more deliberate strikes that thinned the metal without making it brittle. The smith's hammer danced along the edges, folding the steel inward to create a gradual slope. This wasn't just about sharpness, it was about balance. A well-tapered blade wouldn't just cut cleanly, it would feel alive in the wielder's hand. Its weight distributed so perfectly that it seemed to move with a will of its own. The difference between a clumsy weapon and a masterpiece often came down to these critical moments at the anvil. Next came the fullers, those mysterious grooves running along the blade's length. Far from mere decoration, they served a vital purpose. By removing excess material, these channels lightened the weapon without compromising its strength, much like the arches in a cathedral redistribute weight to support towering heights. Hammering in a fuller was a high-stakes maneuver. One misaligned strike could warp the blade irreparably. Some smiths used specialized tools called fuller swagers, while others relied on the rounded edge of their hammer, carefully rocking it along the heated steel to create that perfect, flowing indentation. The result, a blade that was swift as a whisper yet sturdy enough to withstand the chaos of battle. But the blade's form wasn't just about physics, it was a language. A gently curved saber favored slashing cuts, while a straight, double-edged sword excelled at thrusting. The subtle flare near a blade's tip, known as the distal taper, could enhance its piercing ability, while a broader base added momentum to sweeping strikes. Every contour spoke of the smith's intent, shaped by centuries of trial and error passed down through generations. Some blades even featured subtle asymmetries, tailored to the fighting style of a particular warrior, proof that these weapons were as unique as the hands that wielded them. The final act was the careful beveling of the edges where the blade met the world. This was where artistry and lethality intertwined. The smith would angle the hammer blows just so, creating a ridge that transitioned seamlessly from the blade's flat surface to its razor-sharp edge. Too steep an angle, and the edge might chip in combat. Too shallow, and it would dull quickly. The perfect bevel was a compromise, keen enough to slice through armor yet resilient enough to survive the brutality of war. It was here, in these final strokes, that the blacksmith's vision truly came to life, transforming a lump of metal into something that could shape history. What's astounding is how much of this process relied on feel rather than measurement. Without calipers or blueprints, these craftsmen judged angles by eye and balance by instinct. They understood that a blade wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of the human body, and like any limb, it had to move with grace and purpose. The best swords didn't just serve their wielders, they anticipated them, their curves and edges honed to match the flow of combat. This harmony between form and function wasn't accidental. It was the culmination of a lifetime's mastery, where every hammer blow carried the weight of tradition and the spark of innovation. Quenching was the blacksmith's high-stakes gamble, a single, breathless moment where years of labor could be lost or legend could be born. Imagine the scene, a glowing blade, fresh from the forge, hovering over a trough of liquid that would decide its fate. The smith's hands, steady despite the heat radiating from the metal, had to judge not just the temperature but the perfect instant to commit. Too soon, and the steel wouldn't harden properly. Too late, and internal stresses could twist the blade beyond repair. This wasn't just a step in the process. It was a trial by fire and water, where intuition meant the difference between a weapon fit for a king and scrap metal. The science behind quenching was as elegant as it was brutal. When red-hot steel hits liquid, its crystalline structure transforms, locking in hardness that would otherwise be impossible. But this sudden change came at a cost. The metal could become as brittle as glass if not tempered correctly. That's why master smiths didn't rely on water alone. Some swore by brine, its salt content creating a more controlled cooling rate that reduced cracking. Others used animal fats or oils, which cooled the blade more gently, trading a bit of hardness for resilience. The choice wasn't arbitrary, it reflected the weapon's purpose. A dagger meant for piercing might need the extreme hardness of a water quench, while a battle axe, subject to brutal impacts, often benefited from oil's forgiving nature. Listen closely to the stories of old forgers, and you'll hear whispers of even more exotic quenching mediums. Certain smiths believed urine, especially that of a red-haired boy, could impart unique properties to steel. While this might sound like superstition, modern metallurgists suggest the nitrates present in urine could indeed alter the metal's surface chemistry. Then there were legends of blades quenched in blood or honey, though these were likely ceremonial rather than practical. What's undeniable is that every quenching liquid left its mark, not just on the metal's properties but on its very soul. The hiss of the blade entering the liquid wasn't just steam escaping, it was the sound of the steel's character being sealed forever. But quenching was only half the battle. A blade hardened this way would be too brittle for combat, like ice frozen too thick. That's where tempering came in, a delicate dance of reheating the steel just enough to relieve internal stresses without undoing the hardness. The smith would watch for colors as the metal warmed, each hue revealing its progress. Pale yellows meant the blade was still too hard, while deep blues signaled it had softened too much. The perfect temper often lay in the subtle transition to straw or bronze, a fleeting shade that could only be caught by a master's eye. This final step transformed a hardened blade into something both deadly and durable, capable of withstanding the chaos of battle without shattering. The risks of quenching weren't just theoretical. Even the most experienced smiths faced heartbreak when a blade emerged warped or cracked. Some believed these failures carried omens, the metal itself rejecting its destiny. Others saw them as lessons written in steel, each fracture teaching something new about the interplay of heat, time, and material. What's remarkable is how these craftsmen turned unpredictability into an art form. They learned to read the steam rising from the quench, the way bubbles formed on the blade's surface, tiny clues that hinted at whether their work would survive its baptism by fire and liquid. In the end, quenching was more than metallurgy, it was a metaphor. Like the steel they shaped, blacksmiths endured their own trials by fire, moments of intense pressure that revealed their true strength. Every blade that survived the quench carried that resilience forward, a testament to the human hands that guided it through transformation. And when a sword rang true after its ordeal, it wasn't just metal singing, it was the voice of centuries of craftsmanship echoing across time. Tempering was where science and artistry merged in the blacksmith's craft, a delicate balancing act that transformed a hardened blade into something both unyielding and resilient. Picture a freshly quenched sword, its surface shimmering with residual heat as the smith returned it to the fire. But this time the flames were gentler, the goal not to soften but to perfect. The metal's journey wasn't over. It was entering its final refinement, where microscopic crystals within the steel would realign just enough to relieve internal stresses without sacrificing essential hardness. This process wasn't about brute force, it was about finesse, a whispered negotiation between strength and flexibility that would determine whether the blade survived its first clash or shattered like ice. The magic of tempering lay in its colors. As the blade warmed, its surface would begin to oxidize, painting a vivid spectrum across the steel. Pale yellows appeared first, signaling the beginnings of change. Too little heat, and the metal would remain brittle. As temperatures climbed, the hues deepened to golden straw, then rich bronze, each shade marking a precise shift in the steel's properties. The smith's eyes never left this metamorphosis because the most coveted tones, those deep blues and purples, were fleeting. Catch the blade at the right moment, and it would achieve near mythical balance, hard enough to hold an edge through battle, yet flexible enough to bend rather than break under pressure. What's astonishing is how these artisans calibrated such precision without thermometers or timers. Experience taught them that a blade tempered for a night's sweeping slashes needed different qualities than a dagger meant for piercing armor. Some smiths even tailored the temper along a single blade, keeping the edge harder while allowing the spine to remain more flexible, creating a weapon that could absorb shock without compromising lethality. This wasn't guesswork, it was the culmination of generations of observation, where every fractured blade and battle-tested survivor contributed to an ever-evolving understanding of materials. The tools for tempering were deceptively simple. Some smiths used heated sand or ash beds to distribute warmth evenly, while others passed the blade through open flames, rotating it to control the exposure. In colder climates, masters might even temper blades by candlelight, using the steady heat of a flame to gently coax the metal into its ideal state. Each method had its advocates, and regional traditions often reflected local resources, whether it was the fine sands of a riverbed or the clean burning oils available in a bustling market town. Legends grew around particularly skilled temperers, their blades said to possess almost supernatural qualities. The Japanese technique of differential tempering, which created the distinctive wavy hamon line on katana blades, was guarded as closely as state secrets. In Europe, pattern-welded swords bore tempering colors that enhanced their swirling designs, turning functional weapons into moving works of art. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were proof of mastery, visible signatures that a blade had passed through fire and emerged transformed. Yet for all its technical brilliance, tempering carried an almost philosophical weight. In reheating the steel, the blacksmith acknowledged that absolute hardness wasn't the ideal, that true strength required adaptability. A perfectly tempered blade mirrored the warriors who wielded it, unbreakable in spirit, but wise enough to yield when necessary. This final step in the forging process wasn't just about creating a tool, it was about imparting a kind of wisdom where resilience and restraint became inseparable. When a sword sang true after tempering, it wasn't just metal ringing, it was the voice of centuries of craftsmanship distilled into a single, perfect note. Pattern welding was more than just a technique, it was alchemy in steel, a way to turn ordinary metal into something extraordinary. At its core, this method was about solving a problem, how to create a blade that wouldn't snap in battle yet could still hold a razor's edge. The answer lay in layering different types of iron and steel, then twisting and folding them like a baker kneading dough. Each fold compressed impurities out of the metal while weaving together strands of hard and soft material, resulting in a blade that was both flexible and deadly sharp. The Vikings didn't just stumble upon this process, they refined it over generations, their swords becoming as much a symbol of status as they were tools of war. What made pattern welding truly remarkable were the hidden patterns it revealed. When a finished blade was polished and etched with acid, swirling designs emerged: ripples, waves, even intricate ladder-like bands that seemed to dance across the steel. These weren't merely decorative, they were the fingerprints of the blade's creation, a map of every fold and twist that had gone into its making. Some smiths took this artistry further, hammering rods of contrasting metals into elaborate braids before welding them into the blade's core. The result, swords like the legendary Ulfbert, whose name alone struck fear into enemies, carried these mesmerizing patterns like a signature of their maker's skill. The process demanded patience bordering on obsession. A single sword might require dozens of layers, each painstakingly forged, folded, and welded under precisely controlled heat. One misstep, a stray breeze cooling the metal too quickly, an uneven hammer blow, could introduce flaws invisible to the untrained eye but fatal in combat. Masters would sometimes spend weeks on a single blade, their workbench a symphony of glowing metal and rhythmic hammer strikes. They knew that the true test wouldn't come in the forge, but on the battlefield, where a sword's metal would be measured in lives rather than layers. Yet pattern welding wasn't just about brute labor. It was a testament to the blacksmith's understanding of materials. By alternating high-carbon steel for hardness with low-carbon iron for flexibility, they created a natural shock absorber within the blade. Think of it like a tree branch rigid enough to hold its shape but yielding under pressure to avoid breaking. This balance was especially crucial for weapons like the Viking Sikhs, whose broad blades needed to cleave through shields without shattering on impact. Modern metallurgists studying these ancient swords have found grain structures so refined they rival some contemporary alloys, a staggering achievement for craftsmen working without microscopes or precision thermometers. The legacy of pattern welding extends far beyond its time. Even after the Middle Ages gave way to more uniform steel production, the allure of those swirling patterns endured. Today, modern bladesmiths still replicate these techniques, not just for historical accuracy, but because the method produces blades with a character factory steel can't match. There's something deeply human in the way these swords bear the marks of their creation, each one a unique product of fire, force, and the smith's unwavering focus. They remind us that true mastery isn't about eliminating imperfections, but transforming them into strength. The story of Damascus steel reads like something from legend, a material so sharp it could split a hair lengthwise, so strong it never dulled, adorned with watery patterns that seemed to move under light. These blades, coveted by sultans and warriors alike, weren't just tools but marvels of metallurgy that defied the technological limits of their time. What made them extraordinary wasn't just their performance but the mystery shrouding their creation. The original techniques, perfected in the Middle East between the 3rd and 17th centuries, vanished like smoke, leaving behind only whispers and a handful of surviving blades that still baffle modern scientists. At the heart of the mystery lies the steel's composition. Unlike European swords forged from uniform metal, Damascus blades were made from Wrought steel, a high-carbon alloy imported from India and Sri Lanka. This wasn't ordinary ore. It contained trace elements like vanadium and tungsten, impurities that, when handled correctly, became strengths rather than flaws. The smelting process was just as crucial. Artisans would melt the ore in clay crucibles, sealing it with organic materials like leaves or wood chips. As these burned away, they left behind carbon that dissolved into the molten iron, creating a material of unparalleled purity. The result, ingots speckled with microscopic carbides like stars in a night sky, raw potential waiting for the smith's hammer. The real magic happened at the forge. Masters would heat these ingots just enough to make them pliable, then carefully work them at precise temperatures to avoid destroying the delicate carbide structures. Hammering too hot would dissolve these carbides, too cold, and the metal would crack. The smith's skill lay in finding that narrow window where the steel could be shaped without losing its secret strength. Through patient folding and forging, those microscopic carbides aligned into layers, creating the iconic rippling patterns, not just beautiful but functional. These undulating bands acted like natural shock absorbers, letting the blade flex under stress without snapping while maintaining an edge sharp enough to cleave silk madère. Modern attempts to replicate Damascus steel reveal just how sophisticated the original methods were. Laboratories using electron microscopes discovered nanostructures within ancient blades, carbon nanotubes, and nanowires that formed naturally during forging. These tiny structures, invisible to the naked eye, gave the steel self-sharpening properties. As the edge wore down, new, sharper layers were exposed. It's a revelation that bridges ancient craft and cutting-edge nanotechnology, proving these smiths were unwitting pioneers of material science. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson of Damascus steel isn't in its composition but in its legacy. The finest blades bore inscriptions, prayers, signatures, even boasts of their sharpness transforming weapons into cultural artifacts. When the sources of Woot's ore dried up and the last masters took their secrets to the grave, the knowledge didn't just disappear, it became a challenge. Today's bladesmiths, armed with modern tools, still chase the ghost of Damascus steel, not just to recreate it but to understand the minds of those who first tamed fire and metal into something timeless. Their struggle reminds us that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only honored. Creating the perfect sword hilt was an exercise in balance, not just of weight, but of artistry and practicality. While the blade captured attention with its gleaming edge, the hilt was where mastery met the hand, transforming a length of steel into an extension of the warrior's will. Materials mattered deeply here. Oak or ash, dense and shock-absorbent, formed the core of many hilts, while nobles might demand exotic ivory or antler for theirs. But no matter how ornate, every hilt had to fulfill one non-negotiable purpose: to disappear in the wielder's grasp, becoming so natural that the sword seemed to move on instinct. Leather wrapping was where science met sweat. Soaked in water before application, the hide would shrink as it dried, clinging to the hilt like a second skin. Some smiths added subtle ridges beneath the leather, not for decoration but to channel moisture away from the palm during battle. Others wove wire between the wraps, creating a grip that bit into the hand just enough to prevent slippage without causing blisters. The best hilts felt alive, their surfaces responding to the heat and pressure of combat, molding themselves to their owner's touch over years of use. The crossguard was more than a decorative flourish. This simple bar of metal, often overlooked, was the difference between keeping a hand and losing it in a clash. Curved designs deflected incoming blades downward, while straight guards allowed for quick rotations essential for the intricate parries of medieval fencing. Some smiths added subtle downward angles to the quillions, turning what looked like symmetry into a tactical advantage. A well-placed crossguard could even become a weapon itself, its ends sharpened to punch through gaps in an opponent's armor when the blade was otherwise occupied. Then there was the pommel, the counterweight that transformed a sword from a mere cutting tool into a precision instrument. Too heavy, and the blade would feel sluggish; too light, and the tip would waver like a reed in wind. Masters adjusted this final piece like chefs seasoning a dish, adding or shaving grams until the balance point sat exactly where the wielder needed it. Some pommels were hollowed to fine-tune the weight, while others bore intricate carvings that disguised their functional purpose. In skilled hands, this rounded end became a tool of its own, capable of delivering crushing blows when space was too tight for a proper swing. What's often forgotten is how personal hilts truly were. Unlike mass-produced modern handles, each one was shaped for its eventual owner's grip. A knight who favored overhead chops needed a longer hilt to accommodate two-handed use, while a duelist sword might have a slender grip to allow rapid wrist movements. Some smiths even pressed warm wax into their clients' palms to record the exact contours of their fingers, translating those impressions into wood and metal. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was early ergonomics, centuries before the term existed. The true test came not in the workshop but in battle. A poorly balanced sword could exhaust its wielder within minutes, while a perfectly fitted hilt made the weapon feel weightless. Stories tell of warriors who could recognize their blades blindfolded, their fingers tracing the unique grooves and textures imprinted by countless hours of use. In these moments, the hilt ceased to be mere construction. It became the bridge between human intention and steel's deadly potential, a silent partner in every parry, thrust, and victory. Imagine equipping an entire medieval army when no two swords were exactly alike. This was the daily reality of kings and generals, a logistical nightmare by modern standards. While today's factories stamp out identical rifles or bayonets by the thousands, every medieval weapon bore the fingerprints of its maker, from the curve of the crossguard to the heft of the blade. A knight might receive a sword perfectly balanced for his stature, while the soldier beside him struggled with a clumsier weapon, its weight unevenly distributed by an apprentice's unsteady hammer blows. These variations weren't flaws, they were the inevitable result of a craft where human hands, not machines, shaped every inch of steel. The absence of standardization forced armies to adapt in ways that would baffle modern quartermasters. Commanders couldn't simply order 500 identical spears. They had to account for the quirks of regional forges and the limitations of local materials. A shipment of swords from a Rhineland workshop might feel entirely different from those forged in Milan, their blades reacting differently to the same sharpening stones or battlefield stresses. This diversity created a strange advantage. Enemy forces couldn't predict the exact capabilities of opposing weapons, turning every clash into a tactile guessing game. A warrior might parry what looked like a standard longsword, only to find its tip unusually agile or its edge resistant to nicking. Yet within this chaos, certain workshops rose to legendary status. Towns like Passau in Germany or Toledo in Spain became medieval equivalents of luxury brands, their blades commanding premium prices. These masters didn't just meet expectations, they redefined them, developing house styles as recognizable as a painter's brushstrokes. A Passau sword, with its distinctive tapered fuller and polished pommel, signaled elite craftsmanship before the first swing. Nobles would commission weapons years in advance, willing to pay a blacksmith's weight in silver for the assurance of quality. The very lack of mass production elevated these artisans to celebrity status, their names etched into blades like autographs on priceless art. What's easily overlooked is how this system encouraged innovation. Without rigid templates, blacksmiths constantly experimented, adjusting alloys, tweaking tempering techniques, or refining hilt designs based on returning warriors' feedback. A workshop near frequent battlefields might produce sturdier blades to withstand the abuse of siege warfare, while those supplying courtly duelists focused on precision balance. This organic evolution created weapons hyper-specialized for their environments, a far cry from today's one-size-fits-all military gear. The true marvel is that amidst this variability, certain weapons achieved near mythical consistency. The Ulfbert swords scattered across Viking Age Europe shared such uniform quality that scholars debate whether they originated from a single super forge. How these smiths maintained such standards without modern measuring tools remains one of history's quiet mysteries. Their success hints at lost systems of apprenticeship and quality control, perhaps secret molds or template weapons carried between workshops. This era of bespoke warfare left an unexpected legacy. When archaeologists uncover medieval battlefields, the variations in weaponry provide clues no standardized arsenal could. A sword's weight distribution might reveal its origin, while nicks on a blade tell stories of the metal's quality and the battles it endured. In a world where every weapon was unique, each became a historical document, recording the skills, resources, and even the bad days of its maker. The absence of mass production didn't just shape medieval combat, it gave us a richer, more human window into the past. A master blacksmith's workshop was as much a war room as a forge, a place where battlefield experience met molten metal. These artisans didn't simply craft weapons, they studied the physics of combat, understanding how a blade's weight distribution could mean the difference between a killing stroke and a fatal hesitation. When a knight described the wrist fatigue caused by prolonged shield clashes, the smith adjusted the sword's balance point. If an infantryman reported enemy armor deflecting standard thrusts, the solution might be a narrower tip with reinforced stiffness. This wasn't manufacturing, it was tactical co-creation, where every hammer blow carried strategic intent. Consider the greatswords wielded by German Landsknecht mercenaries' monstrous blades exceeding 5 feet in length. What looks like overcompensation was actually precision engineering. Blacksmiths designed them with extended ricasso's unsharpened base sections to allow half-swording techniques, where warriors could choke up on the blade for close-quarters armor penetration. The flamberge variant's wavy edge wasn't decorative. It created disturbing vibrations when clashing with enemy weapons. These weren't random innovations but direct responses to the evolving battlefields of the Renaissance, where smiths worked alongside soldiers like engineers refining military hardware. Daggers reveal another layer of this partnership. The rondel dagger's needle-like profile, capable of slipping between armor joints, emerged from blacksmiths observing how knights exploited gaps in plate defenses. Its disc-shaped guard prevented blood-slicked hands from sliding onto the blade, a grisly practicality born from battlefield reports. Similarly, the cinquedia's broad blade, favored by Italian nobility, balanced slashing power with the ability to parry, reflecting urban duelists' need for versatile self-defense weapons. Each design choice carried generations of accumulated combat wisdom distilled into steel. Mounted warfare demanded entirely different solutions. Cavalry saber's curve wasn't just aesthetic, it allowed riders to deliver devastating draw cuts at full gallop without the blade sticking in targets. Blacksmiths added pronounced Yeoman-widened tips to increase momentum at the point of impact, while fullers lightened the blade to prevent arm fatigue during prolonged charges. The Hungarian Hussar's Schabler even incorporated a lanyard hole in the pommel, a small detail that prevented dismounted warriors from losing their primary weapon mid-combat. Such features reveal how deeply smiths understood the chaos of mounted engagements. Perhaps most fascinating were regional specialty weapons, shaped by local terrain and tactics. The Scottish Claymore's downward, angled crossguards evolved to trap enemy blades in the Highlands' close-quarters fighting. Meanwhile, Middle Eastern scimitars featured radical curves ideal for slashing from camelback, their designs refined through centuries of desert warfare. These geographical variations weren't accidents but evidence of blacksmiths serving as cultural archivists, encoding entire martial traditions into the DNA of their weapons. The greatest smiths became trusted advisors, their workshops functioning as medieval R&D labs. When English longbowmen began piercing French knights' armor at Agincourt, armorers responded with hardened steel plates only for blacksmiths to counter by developing tapered bodkin arrowheads. This arms race between protection and penetration drove continuous innovation, with smiths anticipating battlefield needs sometimes years in advance. Their legacy lives on in modern combat systems, where weapon designers still collaborate closely with special forces to tailor gear for exact mission parameters, proving that the medieval smith's strategic mindset was centuries ahead of its time. The forge wasn't just a workplace, it was a threshold between worlds where fire and faith intertwined. Medieval blacksmiths knew their craft depended on more than skill alone. It demanded harmony with forces beyond human control. They'd mark their anvils with sacred symbols, invoking protection against unseen interference. Some whispered prayers as they folded steel, believing divine breath could enter the metal with each strike. Others buried finished blades in consecrated ground, letting the earth's energy seep into the steel. These weren't empty gestures, they were acts of humility, acknowledging that even the most skilled hands needed help from realms beyond sight. Timing was sacred. Many smiths consulted lunar calendars, forging swords only under a waxing moon, thought to imbue blades with growing strength. Armor meant to protect kings might be quenched during planetary alignments associated with rulership, while daggers intended for surgeons could be tempered under constellations linked to healing. The phases of the moon weren't just celestial events, they were a cosmic workshop schedule, dictating when to harvest wood for charcoal or when to smelt ores. Modern science might dismiss these practices, but they reveal a profound truth. Blacksmiths saw their work as part of nature's grand rhythm, not separate from it. Materials carried their own spirits. Iron ore pulled from certain mines was believed to hold ancestral memories, requiring rituals to awaken its potential. Water drawn from sacred springs became more than a quenching liquid, it was a vessel for blessings. Even the charcoal held significance, with some smiths insisting on wood from lightning-struck trees, convinced the fire of the heavens would transfer its power to the forge. These beliefs created a web of connections, turning every component into a participant in the creative act rather than just raw material. The most fascinating rituals surrounded weapon naming. Just as parents whispered hopes over newborns, smiths would breathe names into freshly polished blades, sometimes aloud, sometimes in silent communion. Norse sagas tell of swords like Tyrfing, cursed to kill a man each time it was drawn, or Gram, which could cleave an anvil in half. These weren't just labels, they were identities forged into the steel, shaping how warriors related to their weapons. A blade christened Oathkeeper carried different expectations than one called Widowmaker, proving that names could be as sharp as edges, yet beneath the mysticism lay practical wisdom. Chanting during repetitive hammering helped maintain rhythm, while lunar-based scheduling ensured consistent workshop routines. Holy water, often drawn from deep wells, contained mineral deposits that could subtly alter quenching results. What seemed like superstition often encoded generations of observational science, wrapped in metaphor for easier transmission. The blacksmith who avoided forging during thunderstorms wasn't just fearing divine wrath, he knew humidity affected steel's behavior, even if he explained it as angry spirits. This blend of practicality and spirituality gave blacksmiths a unique status. They were both craftsmen and keepers of secrets, respected as much for their connection to the unseen as for their tangible creations. When a smith etched runes into a blade or buried a sword hilt up to charge it with earth energy, he wasn't just decorating metal, he was speaking a language that resonated deeply with medieval minds. In an age where the boundary between material and mystical was fluid, the forge became a place where both realms met, and the weapons that emerged carried the imprint of each. Excalibur wasn't just a sword, it was a story forged in steel. According to legend, this blade emerged from a stone, its hilt glittering with promises of destiny. But behind every myth lies a grain of truth. Historians speculate that Excalibur's legend may have been inspired by high-quality pattern-welded swords of the early Middle Ages, their rippling surfaces resembling the play of light on water. The smith who crafted such a weapon would have been revered as more than an artisan. They'd be seen as a channel for divine will. Imagine the weight of that responsibility. Every hammer strike not just shaping metal, but shaping history itself. The Ulfbert swords tell a different kind of tale. These Viking-era blades, marked with the enigmatic plus Ulfbert plus T inscription, were so far ahead of their time that scholars once doubted their authenticity. Their steel contained carbon levels comparable to modern alloys, a feat thought impossible in 9th century Europe. The secret, some believe the iron came from distant mines in Central Asia, traded along routes so secret that even now we can only guess at their path. What's certain is that Ulfbert wasn't just a name, it was a brand, a guarantee of quality so trusted that warriors would have prized these swords above gold. Then there's Durandal, the legendary blade of Roland, said to be indestructible and imbued with sacred relics. While its magical properties belong to epic poems, the reality behind it speaks volumes about medieval craftsmanship. Swords like Durandal were often heirlooms, passed down through generations and repeatedly reforged, each smith adding his own layer of skill to the metal. Their indestructibility might simply reflect generations of meticulous maintenance, a testament to how highly these weapons were valued. Japan's Masamune blades occupy a similar space in Eastern lore. Created by the fabled swordsmith Goro Nudo Masamune, these katanas were so perfectly balanced they were said to divide the wind. The secret lay in the folding process. Some blades contained over 1,000 layers, creating a microstructure that modern scientists still struggle to replicate consistently. Unlike European swords, which often bore their smiths' marks discreetly, Masamune's works were instantly recognizable, their Hammond-temper lines flowing like frozen rivers across the steel. What unites these legendary weapons isn't just their sharpness but their stories. A sword like the Frankish Joyeuse, claimed to have belonged to Charlemagne, wasn't just a tool of war, it was a political symbol, its very existence legitimizing rulers. When kings were crowned, they often held these storied blades, physically connecting themselves to the mythic past. The smiths who made them understood their work would outlive them, carrying their names into battles and ballads they'd never witnessed. The irony is that we remember Excalibur's magic but forget the real wizardry behind it, the blacksmith's ability to transform earth into art. These legendary weapons didn't spring from enchanted forges. They were born from calloused hands, soot-streaked faces, and lifetimes spent deciphering the language of fire and metal. When a warrior claimed his sword could cut through stone, perhaps he wasn't entirely wrong, because every one of these blades did something far more remarkable. They cut through time itself, leaving marks we're still trying to decipher centuries later. Stepping into a medieval blacksmith's workshop was like entering a living, breathing organism, a place where fire, metal, and human ingenuity collided in a symphony of creation. The air hung heavy with the scent of burning charcoal and hot iron, a metallic tang that clung to clothing and skin long after leaving. Against one wall, the forge roared like a captive dragon, its flames licking at the darkness while apprentices fed it with careful handfuls of fuel. Nearby, anvils stood like loyal sentinels, their surfaces scarred and polished from countless encounters with hammer and steel. Tools of every shape dangled from hooks or lay scattered across workbenches, each one worn smooth by hands that knew them as intimately as a painter knows their brushes. What seemed like chaos to an outsider was actually a meticulously choreographed dance. Raw materials occupied every available corner, stacks of iron bars waiting to be transformed, bundles of charcoal sorted by quality, even salvaged metal from broken plowshares or old nails destined for recycling. The blacksmith moved through this space with the confidence of a conductor, knowing precisely where each tool rested without needing to look. A pair of tongs here for gripping red-hot metal, a chisel there for detail work, a selection of hammers arranged by weight. Everything had its place in this ecosystem of creation. The rhythm of the workshop was its heartbeat, between the hiss of steam as hot metal met quenching liquid and the steady percussion of hammers against anvils. An almost musical cadence emerged. Experienced smiths could identify the quality of work just by listening the sharp, clear ring of properly tempered steel versus the dull thud of flawed metal. Apprentices learned to move in sync with these rhythms, fetching tools before they were called for or stepping in to pump the bellows at just the right moment. Their hands bore fresh burns and calluses, badges of initiation into a craft that rewarded patience as much as strength. Despite the soot and sweat, these workshops were far from primitive factories. They were laboratories of innovation where centuries of metallurgical knowledge were preserved and expanded. A master smith might spend mornings repairing a farmer's plow and afternoons experimenting with a new alloy blend, recording his findings not in ledgers but in muscle memory. Secrets passed down through generations, like the exact angle to hold a chisel when engraving or the way certain ores responded to different quenching liquids, were guarded as closely as royal treasures. The social hierarchy within these walls was just as intricate as the tools. Young apprentices started with menial tasks, cleaning ashes, sorting nails, gradually earning the right to handle hotter metals and heavier hammers. Journeymen, their skills honed by years of travel between workshops, brought fresh techniques from distant lands, and at the center stood the master, his authority unquestioned, his judgment the final word on everything from blade balance to the proper way to fold Damascus steel. This wasn't just a job, it was a tradition as structured as the guilds that protected it. Yet for all its order, the workshop remained a place of wonder. Customers from every walk of life passed through its doors, knights seeking battle-worthy swords, merchants needing sturdy locks, even housewives with bent cooking pots. Each visit was a negotiation not just of price but of possibility. Could the smith replicate that intricate hinge from memory? Would this new alloy hold up under a mason's heavy use? The answers weren't found in manuals but in the collective wisdom of the forge, where every challenge was met with the same response: let's see what the fire can do. What modern workshops achieve with digital precision and climate control, these medieval artisans accomplished through sensory mastery. They judged temperatures by the color of glowing metal, diagnosed flaws by the sound of a hammer strike, and adjusted techniques based on how the morning's humidity made the charcoal burn. Their workshops weren't just workplaces but extensions of their own expertise, a physical manifestation of knowledge that couldn't be fully written down, only lived. In an age before blueprints or quality control charts, the true blueprint was etched into the smith's hands, his tools, and the very walls that absorbed generations of trial and triumph. The life of a medieval blacksmith was written in scars and calluses, each mark a testament to the brutal beauty of their craft. Picture hands that could crush walnuts yet manipulate glowing metal with surgeon's precision, arms corded with muscle from swinging hammers for hours without rest. Their days began before dawn, stoking the forge into a roaring inferno that would chase away the morning chill, and ended long after sunset when the last embers faded to ash. The heat was relentless, searing lungs with every breath, while showers of sparks left constellations of tiny burns on exposed skin. Yet these weren't just wounds, they were badges of honor, proof of endurance in a profession that tested both body and spirit daily. Respect flowed to blacksmiths like molten metal into molds, though it was earned through more than skill alone. A village smith functioned as equal parts artisan, chemist, and emergency repairman, the person you turned to when your plow snapped during harvest or your door's hinges gave way midwinter. Their workshops became community hubs where gossip mingled with the clang of steel, and a wise smith knew how to listen as well as they forged. Noble patrons paid handsomely for ceremonial swords or intricate locks, but it was the steady stream of farmers, carters, and housewives that kept the bellows pumping year-round. This duality gave blacksmiths a unique social footing, neither peasant nor aristocrat, but indispensable to both. Generational knowledge was the true inheritance in smithing families. A master's son might start as a barefoot apprentice, tasked with minding the fire or sorting nails, gradually earning the right to touch hammer to hot metal. The learning was visceral lessons absorbed through blistered fingers and ruined workpieces rather than parchment and ink. Techniques weren't just taught but embodied, from the exact wrist flick needed to create a perfect scroll to the way one's knees should bend when drawing out a lengthy bar. Some families guarded specialty techniques like state secrets, certain quenching methods, or alloy blends that made their blades or armor superior. When a father finally placed his personal hammer into his heir's hands, it wasn't just a tool being passed down, but an unbroken chain of craftsmanship stretching back centuries. The physical toll was balanced by profound creative fulfillment. Unlike farmers whose labor vanished with the next season's plowing or merchants whose goods were consumed and forgotten, a blacksmith's work endured. A well-made sword might outlive its maker by generations, its steel still ringing true in battles the smith would never witness. Gates forged in youth would groan open for grandchildren, and church bells cast from their furnaces would toll across decades. This legacy in iron and steel offered something rare in the medieval world, a kind of immortality. When chronicles recorded great battles or cathedral constructions, they seldom mentioned the smiths, yet every victory arch and knight's tomb bore silent witness to their indispensable artistry. What modern workplaces achieve with ergonomic chairs and safety goggles, medieval smiths countered with raw adaptability. They developed an almost supernatural tolerance for heat, able to judge temperature by the way sweat evaporated from their brows. Burns became second nature, their hands toughened like the leather aprons they wore. The cacophony of the workshop hammers ringing, bellows wheezing, apprentices shouting, faded into a kind of white noise that seasoned smiths could navigate with eerie calm. And through it all, they maintained the meticulous focus of scribes, because one distracted moment could mean a ruined workpiece or a life-altering injury. Yet for all its hardships, the forge offered freedoms unknown to most medieval laborers. Unlike serfs bound to feudal lords or guildsmen trapped in rigid hierarchies, skilled smiths could travel where their talents were valued. A master with a portable anvil and a sack of tools might wander from castle to monastery, his services bartered for room, board, and silver. Those who settled in towns often became pillars of their communities, their workshops serving as de facto councils where disputes were mediated over the rhythm of hammer blows. The work never ceased, blades dulled, wheels broke, armor dented, but in that constancy lay security. While kings rose and fell, the blacksmith's anvil remained, its song echoing through the ages as proof that human hands, when guided by knowledge and will, could shape the world itself. The finest swords in medieval Europe carried price tags that would stagger modern minds equivalent to years of a skilled laborer's wages. A high-carbon steel blade, painstakingly folded and tempered, could cost as much as a small farm, placing it firmly beyond reach of anyone but nobility or elite mercenaries. This wasn't just commerce, it was a metal-based caste system where the quality of your steel often determined your place on the battlefield. Kings might commission gilded swords with pommels of gem-studded rock crystal, while foot soldiers clutched spears tipped with little more than fire-hardened ash and scrap iron. The disparity wasn't merely decorative, it meant the difference between a blade that could cleave through chainmail and one that might snap on first impact. Raw materials alone could bankrupt lesser workshops. High-quality iron ore had to travel dangerous trade routes from mines in modern-day Sweden or the Rhineland, its value multiplying with each mile. The charcoal needed to fuel a single sword's forging required an acre of hardwood forest reduced to embers. Add the weeks of labor from multiple craftsmen or smelters, blade forgers, hilt carvers, and even a modest weapon became a luxury item. Some smiths kept detailed ledgers showing how adding just 3 more folds to a blade steel could double its price, while intricate pattern welding could make it 10 times as expensive as a peasant's tool. Resourcefulness became as vital as skill. Blacksmiths along war-torn borders became masters of recycling, melting down captured weapons or broken agricultural implements into serviceable steel. Armorers patched together brigandines from hundreds of scavenged plates, turning battlefield scrap into affordable protection. Even royal arsenals practiced this frugality. The Tower of London's records show swords being issued, returned for repairs, and reissued for decades. A thrifty smith might incorporate everything from old horseshoes to ship nails into secondary weapons, creating an entire economy of reused metal that trickled down to the poorest conscripts. This financial reality reshaped medieval warfare itself. The myth of vast armies clad in shining plate armor ignores the truth that most soldiers wore whatever they could scavenge or afford. A typical 14th century infantryman's armor might consist of a quilted gambeson and a helmet forged from a single sheet of cheap iron, while his wealthier counterpart gleamed in articulated steel worth a duke's ransom. Tactics adapted accordingly. Swiss pikemen triumphed over Burgundian knights, not just through discipline, but because their massed pikes were exponentially cheaper than cavalry gear, allowing larger forces to be fielded. Guilds tightly controlled this lucrative trade, enforcing quality standards while protecting their monopolies. A master swordsmith in Toledo or Passau couldn't simply undercut competitors' prices were fixed, and substandard work risked destroying a workshop's reputation. Some cities mandated that weapons bear makers' marks not just for pride but for accountability, creating medieval equivalents of brand names. The finest blades became investment pieces, sometimes listed in wills alongside estates and jewels. When the French crown pawned its royal sword collection in 1356 to fund war efforts, the transaction involved enough capital to ransom a king. Yet for all the focus on elite weapons, the backbone of medieval armies was forged from humble metal. The spear that toppled knights at Agincourt likely cost less than a chicken, its ash shaft and simple iron head produced in bulk by village smiths. These unsung artisans perfected economies of scale centuries before industrialization, creating serviceable arms through streamlined processes, straight hammer blows instead of intricate folding, standardized lengths for easier training. Their work reminds us that while history remembers Excalibur, it was ordinary steel that truly shaped the medieval world. The clang of swords against chainmail began fading from battlefields as the medieval arms race escalated, forcing blacksmiths to reinvent their craft almost overnight. When knights started encasing themselves in gleaming plate armor, traditional slashing weapons bounced off like rain on stone, a problem that sent smiths back to their anvils in furious innovation. The solution emerged in slender, needle-pointed rapiers whose tapered tips could find the microscopic gaps between armor plates. These weren't just sharper swords, they were precision instruments requiring steel of unprecedented purity and tempering techniques so exact that overheating the metal by mere seconds could ruin months of work. Smiths who once hammered out broad cutting edges now obsessed over distal taper, gradually thinning the blade toward the tip to concentrate force like a scorpion's sting. Polearms became the blacksmith's answer to battlefield physics. Where a sword struggled against plate armor, a halberd's hooked beak could yank a knight from his saddle while its spear tip punched through visor slits. Crafting these hybrid weapons demanded new forging strategies, welding hardened steel points onto flexible iron shafts, then reinforcing stress points with Langets metal straps that prevented wooden hafts from splitting under impact. The most feared variants, like the Swiss valge, combined axe, hook, and spike in a single terrifying package, their effectiveness depending on the smith's ability to balance weight distribution so the weapon felt light in a soldier's hands despite its brutal mass. Crossbows transformed blacksmiths into early ballistic engineers. Unlike traditional arrows with wooden shafts, crossbow bolts needed forged metal heads capable of penetrating armor at close range. Smiths developed specialized piercing tips with square cross-sections designs that sacrificed aerodynamic elegance for raw penetration power. The real challenge lay in crafting the bow's metal components. Tempered steel prods, the curved arms storing kinetic energy, required such consistent flexibility that some workshops tested them by suspending weights and measuring deflection angles with primitive protractors. A poorly forged prod didn't just fail, it could explode upon release, sending deadly shrapnel into the shooter's face. Siege warfare pushed blacksmithing to monumental scales. When castles grew taller walls, attackers responded with trebuchets whose metal fittings had to withstand forces equivalent to modern cargo trucks crashing at full speed. Blacksmiths assembled massive iron bands to reinforce throwing arms, forged colossal hinges for battering rams, and even developed early ball bearings for siege tower wheels, each component demanding custom alloys that balanced weight and durability. The counterweight trebuchet's axle alone might require a ton of specially smelted iron, worked by teams of smiths using trip hammers powered by water mills. These weren't just tools of war, they were masterclasses in medieval mechanical engineering, all born from the relentless problem-solving of armorers who'd never seen a physics textbook. Adaptation became survival. When gunpowder weapons began appearing on 14th century battlefields, many feared blacksmithing would become obsolete. Instead, smiths pivoted to crafting matchlock mechanisms, reinforcing barrels with wrought iron hoops, and developing bullet molds. Their ability to repurpose centuries of metalworking knowledge kept them indispensable even as warfare changed beyond recognition. The greatest testament to their ingenuity lies not in any single weapon, but in their relentless capacity to evolve, proving that the true measure of a blacksmith's skill wasn't just shaping metal, but reshaping their entire craft to meet the demands of an unpredictable world. The roar of steam engines and the clatter of assembly lines heralded a revolution that would silence centuries of hammer songs. As factories began stamping out uniform rifles and bayonets by the thousands, the painstaking craftsmanship of the medieval forge seemed suddenly obsolete. A single industrial press could produce in 1 hour what a master smith might take weeks to create: perfectly identical muskets rolling off conveyor belts like loaves from a baker's oven. The economics were undeniable. Why pay a guild artisan's wages for a hand-forged saber when a factory made equivalent cost a fraction of the price? Yet something intangible vanished in this transition, the subtle imperfections that made each medieval weapon a unique extension of its wielder's hand, the whispered collaboration between smith and steel that no machine could replicate. Regiments now marched with interchangeable weapons, their standardized parts making battlefield repairs as simple as swapping cogs in a clock. This mechanical precision brought tactical advantages, consistent accuracy, streamlined logistics, but at a spiritual cost. The swords that once bore the fingerprints of their makers became anonymous tools, their souls mass-produced along with their blades. Even the legendary workshops of Toledo and Passau, whose names had echoed through battlefields for generations, found themselves struggling against the tide of progress. The very guilds that had safeguarded centuries of metallurgical secrets now watched helplessly as their traditions were rendered quaint relics in the age of industrialization. Yet, like embers stubbornly glowing in a dying forge, pockets of resistance kept the old ways alive. High in the Alps, isolated village smiths continued supplying hunters with hand-forged knives whose balance factory replicas couldn't match. Japanese swordsmiths, protected by imperial decree, preserved the sacred rituals of tamahagane steel folding, a living bridge to their samurai past. These holdouts weren't just making weapons, they were safeguarding entire philosophies of craftsmanship, where the journey from ore to blade mattered as much as the final product. A factory-stamped bayonet might kill as effectively as a hand-forged one, but it carried none of the stories, none of the human struggle that gave medieval weapons their almost mystical resonance. The 20th century saw an unexpected revival of these ancient techniques, not from military necessity but artistic passion. Bladesmithing emerged as a form of living history, with modern artisans painstakingly recreating Viking pattern, welded swords or medieval falchions using period-accurate tools. Museums became treasure troves of inspiration, their collections studied by smiths eager to reverse engineer the secrets of ancient masters. The American Bladesmith Society even established a rigorous apprenticeship program mirroring medieval guild structures, proof that the transmission of handcraft knowledge could thrive outside factory walls. What's fascinating is how industrialization's own advances eventually fed this revival. Modern metallurgy provided scientific explanations for techniques medieval smiths had developed through intuition. Why certain quenching liquids produced superior hardness, how carbon distribution affected flexibility. Contemporary smiths now wield this knowledge like alchemists granted the philosopher's stone, combining ancient methods with cutting-edge understanding to create blades that would astonish their medieval predecessors. The finest modern hand-forged swords represent a dialogue across centuries, where a 13th century tempering technique might be perfected using 21st century temperature controls. The romance of the handcrafted blade endures because it speaks to something primal in us, the awe of witnessing raw earth transformed by human will into objects of lethal beauty. When a modern smith spends 80 hours folding steel to recreate a Crusader-era longsword, they're not just producing a weapon, they're keeping faith with every anonymous artisan who ever bent over a glowing forge, their faces lit by the same elemental fire. In an age of disposable goods, these painstaking recreations remind us that some things deserve to be made slowly, with reverence for the materials and respect for the hands that shape them. The medieval forge may have faded from necessity, but its spirit still burns wherever a hammer meets steel in the old way, not for efficiency, but for the sheer stubborn joy of keeping the past alive, one glowing blade at a time. The glow of a modern forge might run on propane instead of charcoal, but the hands shaping the steel still move with the same deliberate rhythm as their medieval predecessors. Across workshops from rural Pennsylvania to the shadow of German castles, a dedicated community of bladesmiths keeps ancient techniques alive by crafting historically accurate replicas, not as museum pieces behind glass, but as functional weapons that sing through the air just as they did 800 years ago. These artisans don't just imitate old designs, they resurrect entire workflows, from smelting their own iron in clay furnaces to tempering blades in barrels of linseed oil, determined to experience every nuance their ancestors faced. When one of these modern forged swords balances perfectly in a warrior's grip, it's not just metal speaking, it's centuries of accumulated knowledge given new breath. What sets these replicas apart from factory-made reproductions is their obsessive authenticity. Master smiths like Denmark's Jens Posk use spectral analysis on surviving medieval swords to replicate exact alloy compositions, while others study period manuscripts like the 12th century Mappy clavicula for forgotten quenching techniques. The goal isn't just visual accuracy but tactile truth. The way a properly weighted longsword seems to pivot effortlessly at the midpoint of the blade, or how a pattern welded seeks flexes without breaking when put through brutal cutting tests. Workshops like Maryland's Arms and Armor even employ medieval-style grindstones turned by water wheels, proving that sometimes the old ways yield results modern machines can't match. The quest to recreate Damascus steel reads like a metallurgical detective story. Since no original Wootz iron ore remains, modern smiths like Alabama's Rick Furrer experiment with trace elements like vanadium and molybdenum, melting down vintage railroad spikes or even meteorites to approximate the legendary material. Some have come startlingly close. Blades etched in ferric chloride reveal the watery patterns of true Damascus, while lab tests show nanocrystalline structures eerily similar to ancient samples. Though the exact formula remains elusive, each attempt deepens our appreciation for medieval smiths who achieved such consistency without spectrographs or temperature probes. Living history events have become the proving grounds for these replicas, where combat reenactors wielding them in full armor demonstrate their battlefield viability. At England's Tewkesbury Medieval Festival, fighters clash with swords forged using 15th century methods, their blades ringing with the same timbre as those that echoed at Agincourt. The real test comes when these weapons endure years of simulated combat without failing, a testament to how accurately their makers have decoded the past. Far from being fragile imitations, the best replicas convince even seasoned historians when placed beside museum originals. This revival isn't just about nostalgia, it's a vital feedback loop for understanding history. When a smith spends weeks folding steel to recreate a Viking-age spather, they gain insights no textbook can offer: how certain hammer angles affect grain structure, or why medieval accounts mention quenching blades at the first crow of dawn. Universities now collaborate with artisan smiths, applying scientific rigor to traditional methods. The University of York's Archaeology Department, for example, uses replica weapons in controlled tests to settle debates about medieval combat techniques, proving that practical craftsmanship can reshape academic theories. Perhaps most remarkably, this movement has birthed a new generation of masters who bridge eras. Japan's Yoshindo Yoshihara, designated a living national treasure, forges katanas using Heian period methods while advising materials scientists on carbon nanostructures. In Texas, the nonprofit The Crucible teaches at-risk youth medieval smithing as both vocational training and a connection to heritage. The Anvil song, it seems, still has lessons to teach, not just about metal, but about patience, precision, and the enduring power of human ingenuity. When a modern smith's hammer strikes hot steel today, it doesn't just shape a blade. It forges a living link across centuries, ensuring that the fire of the medieval forge never truly goes cold. Hollywood would have you believe medieval swords were monstrous slabs of metal, requiring Herculean strength to swing. In truth, a finely crafted longsword rarely exceeded 3 pounds lighter than most modern laptops. This misconception stems from poorly weighted replicas and exaggerated battle scenes, but historical accounts tell a different story. Knights trained for hours with these precision instruments, their blades balanced so perfectly they seemed to move on their own. The myth of cumbersome swords ignores the blacksmith's genius in weight distribution, how a tapered blade and carefully hollowed fuller could make a 3-foot weapon feel nimble as a kitchen knife. Another persistent fiction is the lone blacksmith toiling in isolation, sparks flying as he single-handedly forges a masterpiece. Reality was far more collaborative. A bustling workshop resembled a small factory with apprentices pumping bellows, journeymen hammering out basic shapes, and specialized grinders putting final edges on blades. Even the master smith rarely worked without assistance. Someone had to tend the fire, hold tongs during critical welds, or run to fetch materials. Guild records from cities like Cologne show workshops employing up to a dozen workers, each with defined roles. The romantic image of a solitary craftsman ignores the teamwork that made complex projects possible, from cathedral gates to articulated armor. Perhaps the most misleading myth is that blacksmithing was pure brute force, all muscle and no finesse. Watch a skilled smith at work, and you'll see the opposite: the way a slight twist of the wrist while hammering can spread metal evenly, or how experienced eyes judge temperature by the subtlest color shifts in glowing steel. Medieval manuscripts describe smiths testing blade flexibility by bending them against their foreheads, using their own bodies as precision instruments. This wasn't mindless pounding, it was a dance of physics and intuition, where a single misplaced strike could ruin weeks of labor. Then there's the fantasy of swords being folded hundreds of times like Japanese katana, a trope endlessly recycled in films and games. While pattern-welded blades did involve layering, European smiths typically folded steel no more than a dozen times. Any further risked burning out the carbon needed for hardness. The dramatic sparks flying from every hammer blow in movies, another exaggeration. Skilled smiths avoided unnecessary sparking, which often signaled overheating and carbon loss. Their strikes were controlled and efficient, conserving both metal and energy. Even the iconic image of quenching a blade by plunging it dramatically into water misses crucial nuance. Master smiths knew different steels required different treatments. Some blades needed oil for slower cooling, while others benefited from interrupted quenching, where the metal was alternately dipped and withdrawn to prevent warping. Some traditions even specified the water source, with mountain spring water prized for its mineral content. These weren't superstitious rituals, but the culmination of generations of observation, encoded into practices that modern metallurgy now confirms as scientifically sound. The enduring appeal of these myths speaks to our fascination with the medieval world, but unraveling them reveals something far more impressive: the real sophistication of blacksmiths who achieved extraordinary results without modern technology. Their legacy isn't in the fantastical tales we've invented, but in the actual swords that survive today, still sharp after centuries, and the workshop techniques that continue to inspire modern metalworkers. When we strip away the Hollywood gloss, what remains is a truth more compelling than fiction. Ordinary humans achieving extraordinary things through skill, patience, and an intimate conversation with fire and iron. Medieval blacksmiths may not have known about carbon content or crystalline structures, but their hands understood what modern scientists now measure with electron microscopes. When a smith folded glowing steel repeatedly, he wasn't just strengthening the metal, he was aligning its grain structure in ways that electron backscatter diffraction now reveals as nanocrystalline perfection. Those mesmerizing patterns in Damascus blades, they're actually microscopic carbide bands, formed through precise temperature control that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate even with digital pyrometers. The blacksmith's ability to judge heat by color, seeing the difference between cherry red and orange red, corresponds almost exactly to the critical phase transition points where steel's molecular structure changes. Consider the quenching process, often dismissed as superstition when medieval texts mention using morning dew or rainwater. Advanced mass spectrometry shows these waters contain dissolved gases and minerals that created unique cooling rates, preventing the brittle fractures plaguing modern smiths using distilled water. That legendary practice of tempering blades in the warmth of a spring sunrise, it maintained temperatures between 400 and 600 degrees Fahrenheit, the exact range where steel achieves optimal toughness without losing hardness. These weren't random rituals, they were empirical protocols refined over generations, encoded in language that modern science is only now decoding. The real revelation comes from studying pattern-welded swords under X-ray fluorescence. What appear as beautiful surface swirls are actually layered alloys with varying carbon concentrations, early examples of functionally graded materials. By alternating hard high-carbon steel with soft low-carbon iron, smiths created natural shock absorbers within the blade. Modern engineers use similar principles in aircraft turbines, yet medieval artisans achieved this through meticulous hammer control alone. Even their failures were instructive. Metallurgical analysis of broken archaeological finds shows smiths consistently adjusted techniques, thicker cross-sections here, different quenching liquids there, demonstrating systematic problem solving that mirrors the scientific method. Perhaps most astonishing is how these craftsmen manipulated steel's crystalline phases without knowing they existed. When a medieval sword survives centuries without corrosion, it's often because the smith inadvertently formed a protective layer of cementite, an iron carbide that modern labs create using vacuum chambers. Those legendary Ulfbert swords with their ultra-high carbon content, their purity rivals modern surgical steel, achieved through carburization techniques that precisely controlled carbon diffusion rates. The blacksmith's forge was effectively a primitive scanning electron microscope, every color change, every hammer ring, every curl of steam providing real-time feedback about processes we now describe with quantum mechanics. This marriage of intuition and innovation reached its peak in differential hardening techniques like those used on Japanese katana. By coating blades in clay slurry before quenching, smiths created varying cooling rates that produced a blade with a hard edge and flexible spine, a concept now called composite material design. When conservationists at the British Museum used neutron diffraction to study these swords, they found the transition zone between hard and soft steel measured just 200 micrometers, a precision modern lasers struggle to match. The medieval forge wasn't just a workplace, it was the world's first materials science lab, where flame and observation unlocked secrets that would take universities centuries to explain. What modern researchers uncover with million-dollar spectrometers, these artisans deduced through generations of careful observation, each master adding another verse to an unspoken metallurgical epic. Their legacy lives on in unexpected places, from the heat-treated gears of Swiss watches to the folded alloys in jet engine fan blades. The next time you see a medieval sword gleaming in a museum case, remember, you're not looking at a relic, but a masterpiece of materials engineering that still has lessons to teach. While European blacksmiths were hammering out broadswords in smoky workshops across the globe, other cultures were forging weapons just as revolutionary, but with entirely different philosophies. Take the Japanese katana, a blade so revered it was considered the soul of the samurai. Unlike European swords meant for hacking through chainmail, the katana's graceful curve was optimized for lightning-fast draw cuts. Its laminated steel folded so many times the metal gained a grain like fine wood. Japanese smiths didn't just forge swords, they conducted sacred rituals, timing their work to lunar cycles and tempering blades in clay slurry to create that distinctive wavy hammer line where hard edge met flexible spine. The result wasn't just a weapon but a masterpiece, often taking months to complete, proof that blacksmithing could reach the level of high art. Half a world away in the deserts of the Middle East, blacksmiths faced a different set of challenges and opportunities. The curved scimitar wasn't just a stylistic choice. Its crescent shape allowed warriors on horseback to deliver devastating slashes without losing momentum. Persian and Turkish smiths became masters of Wootz steel, the legendary material behind Damascus blades. By controlling the cooling process with astonishing precision, they created swords with visible surface patterns resembling flowing water, a mesmerizing effect caused by microscopic carbide bands that also made the edges self-sharpening with use. While European knights prized straight blades for thrusting, the scimitar's design celebrated the fluid, circular motions favored by cavalry in open terrain, showing how culture and combat style shaped every curve of the smith's hammer. Africa's blacksmithing traditions tell another fascinating story. The Fulani people of West Africa crafted Takuba swords with wide, straight blades ideal for slashing through light armor, while the Maasai fashioned slim, double-edged seam knives for both combat and ceremony. What's remarkable is how these smiths achieved such quality without the high carbon ores available elsewhere. They became experts at recycling, reforging trade iron, and even colonial-era nails into weapons that could hold their own in battle. Some tribes developed unique hardening techniques using local plants, burning specific woods to create charcoal rich in trace minerals that altered the metal's properties during quenching. This resourcefulness turned scarcity into innovation, proving that limited materials didn't mean inferior results. The differences extended beyond blade shapes into the very soul of the craft. In feudal Japan, swordsmiths were seen as spiritual figures, their forges resembling temples where purity rituals preceded each forging session. Contrast this with the Viking approach, where a blacksmith might be viewed as both craftsman and mystic, capable of weaving magic into sword hilts with intricate wire inlays and runic inscriptions. Islamic smiths often etched Quranic verses into their blades, believing the sacred words conferred protection, while Chinese sword makers incorporated principles of yin and yang balance into their tempering processes. These cultural fingerprints remind us that blacksmithing was never just about function. It was a language through which societies expressed their deepest beliefs about war, honor, and the relationship between maker and metal. Yet for all their diversity, these traditions shared profound similarities. Whether it was a Japanese smith folding steel or a Viking pattern welding layers of iron, the goal was the same: to create a blade that balanced hardness with flexibility. The solutions might look different: differential hardening versus twisted rod cores, but the metallurgical wisdom behind them was universal. From the steppes of Mongolia to the castles of England, every great smith understood that true mastery lay in listening to the metal, adapting techniques to its behavior rather than forcing rigid formulas. This global conversation across anvils reminds us that while cultures shaped blacksmithing in unique ways, the fire at the heart of the craft burned the same everywhere, a testament to human ingenuity's ability to find multiple paths to excellence when faced with the same elemental challenges. There's something almost primal about the way a medieval sword feels in your hands, the weight of history balanced between your fingers, the whisper of centuries-old steel cutting the air. In an era dominated by drones and digital warfare, these ancient weapons still command our attention, not just as relics but as masterpieces of human ingenuity. They represent a world where every hammer strike carried intention, where the difference between life and death could hinge on the angle of a blade's edge. Museums don't display these artifacts behind glass just to preserve them. They're there because these objects still speak to us, their stories echoing across battlefields long gone quiet. Consider the emotional resonance of holding a weapon forged by hand. Unlike the sterile uniformity of modern firearms, each medieval blade bears the fingerprints of its maker, subtle variations in balance, the unique ripple of pattern-welded steel, even the way light dances along a well-worn edge. These aren't mass-produced tools but expressions of individual artistry, shaped by the same principles that guide a sculptor or painter. When a collector acquires a 15th-century longsword, they're not just owning a piece of history, they're safeguarding a conversation between craftsman and material that took place over 600 years ago. That intimacy is irreplaceable, a quality no assembly line can replicate. The fascination runs deeper than aesthetics. Medieval weapons embody a paradox. They're both brutal and beautiful, instruments of destruction crafted with poetic precision. A Gothic-era mace might feature fluted edges designed to fracture armor, yet its surface could be adorned with delicate engravings of saints or mythical beasts. This duality reflects the complexity of the medieval mindset, where faith and violence, art and warfare coexisted without contradiction. Modern reproductions might mimic the form, but they can't capture the cultural DNA encoded in every original piece. The prayers whispered over hot steel, the guild secrets passed from master to apprentice, the societal values that shaped each curve and point. Pop culture has only amplified their mystique. From Tolkien's Anduril to the iconic swords of Game of Thrones, fantasy worlds lean heavily on medieval weaponry because it carries inherent gravitas. These stories tap into a collective memory of blades as symbols of power, honor, even destiny. When Arthur pulls Excalibur from the stone, or Aragorn wields Narsil reforged, we're not just watching plot devices in action. We're witnessing modern retellings of a very old relationship between humans and the tools they imbue with meaning. The weapons become characters in their own right, as vital to the narrative as the heroes who wield them. Scientific curiosity also fuels our obsession. Modern metallurgists study medieval swords with the same reverence art historians reserve for Renaissance paintings. Using electron microscopes and X-ray fluorescence, they've uncovered astonishing sophistication in alloys and tempering techniques, methods so advanced that some remain elusive despite contemporary technology. The famed Ulfbert swords, with their ultra-high carbon steel, still spark debates about medieval trade routes and lost forging secrets. Every time researchers uncover another layer of craftsmanship, it challenges our assumptions about the so-called Dark Ages, revealing an era of innovation that rivaled the Industrial Revolution in its own way. Perhaps their enduring appeal lies in what they represent, a tangible connection to a time when skill was measured in calluses and survival depended on the harmony of hand and tool. In a world of disposable goods and planned obsolescence, these weapons stand as testaments to durability and care. They remind us that excellence isn't about shortcuts, but about the willingness to invest time, sweat, and soul into creating something that outlasts its maker. When we admire a medieval dagger's intricate hilt or test the balance of a replica battle axe, we're not just indulging in nostalgia, we're paying homage to the universal human drive to shape the world with our hands, to leave behind objects that tell our stories long after we're gone. From the fiery forges of the Middle Ages to the glowing workshops of today's master bladesmiths, the legacy of medieval blacksmiths burns brighter than ever. These artisans didn't just shape metal, they shaped history itself, turning raw ore into objects of war, utility, and breathtaking beauty. What's astonishing isn't just what they achieved with bellows, hammers, and anvils, but how their innovations still resonate in our modern world. The next time you admire a medieval sword in a museum case, look beyond its gleaming edge. See the calloused hands that folded its steel, the eyes that judged its temper by the color of flame, the generations of knowledge passed down like a sacred trust. Each weapon is a frozen moment in an unbroken chain of craftsmanship stretching back over 1,000 years. This isn't just history, it's a living tradition. In workshops from rural Sweden to urban Tokyo, modern smiths still kneel before charcoal forges, their hammers moving to the same rhythms as their medieval predecessors. They're not recreating the past, they're conversing with it, using ancient techniques to answer timeless questions about strength, balance, and artistry. When a bladesmith today folds steel to recreate a Viking Age pattern welded sword, they're not just making a replica, they're walking in the footsteps of those who first discovered how fire and iron could dance together. The tools may have evolved: propane forges replacing charcoal pits, digital thermometers joining experienced eyes, but the essence remains unchanged. Metal still speaks its ancient language to those willing to listen. What these medieval masters left us goes far beyond swords and armor. Their problem-solving mindset, adapting scarce materials, refining processes through relentless experimentation, mirrors the innovative spirit driving modern engineering. The layered steels they pioneered inspire today's composite materials, while their heat-treating secrets inform everything from aerospace alloys to surgical tools. Even their workshop structure, master guiding apprentice through hands-on practice, remains the gold standard for technical education. In an age of disposable goods, their reverence for durability and precision feels almost revolutionary. So the next time you watch sparks fly in a blacksmith shop or run your fingers along a sword's fuller, remember, you're touching more than metal. You're connecting with humanity's unbroken drive to shape the world with fire, force, and imagination. These craftsmen may have worked in soot-streaked obscurity, but their genius shines through the centuries. If their story ignited your curiosity, join the conversation below. Share which aspect of medieval blacksmithing amazed you most, or which legendary weapon you'd love to see forged today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep exploring history's hidden wonders with us. The Anvil song isn't fading, it's waiting for new ears to hear its timeless rhythm.